About 15 seconds.
Alrighty.
And there we are. Hi, this is Sir Rithkin in Ontir, and I have a very special guest host today, Sir Kelwin from Artemisia, and we have the privilege and honor of interviewing His Grace Duke Paul of Bellatrix, who lived in the West but is now in my kingdom, and we get all his teaching, and that's awesome. This is part of my ducal interview series. I think Paul is number 18 now. And I'm really looking forward to it because he really helped shape the West, and he has got a wealth of stuff and knowledge to tell us. So we usually start these with your origin story. So if you could tell me how you found the SCA and when, that would be awesome.
Let's see, it was like in 67 when I was in just finishing up my bachelor's, having taken a longer time than I should have to do it. And I was going to be going in the Army. And the guy sitting next to me, who was a friend of mine in one of my logic classes, saw that I had Marvel Comics. And so we became friends, and he knew I played judo. So he says, hey, I got this thing that you might really enjoy. And he showed it to me, and I said, wow, this is wonderful. I don't have a chance to do it now. So as soon as I got out of the Army, we went to the next tournament, which was October Crown of 1970 in the West.
So when you went to that first October Crown, did you have armor, or were you just watching and seeing what it was all about?
Well, sort of. I had made a helmet, really weird, but it would have worked. I had made the handle of a sword by taking a piece of pipe and cutting it down and bending it out into cross guard, and cutting the rest of it so didn't weigh so much. And I just stick a piece of rattan in there. I made a great sword and a single-handed sword, and I had a shield. And the Earl Marshal didn't get around to qualify me. And I'm sort of glad, because I didn't have rattan. I had eucalyptus swords.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how much longer?
Go ahead.
So how much longer after that before you actually did fight in your first tournament?
The first real tournament I had was next March Crown, because we just didn't have much in the way of tournaments back then. Yeah, so that was it. And then my first fight, I found that there were left-handed people in the person of Duke Richard, who was the first Duke, and this thing hit me. And I went, where the heck did that come from?
So did you have a practice that you were going to?
Yeah, I lived in San Jose at the time, and I would drive up to Oakland on weekends. I belonged to House Chaos, and it was a big household and a lot of fun people. And eventually, about 6 months later, I started running the practice, which sort of became the kingdom practice very quickly.
So were you squire to somebody in that household or someone outside of the household?
No, I didn't have enough time. my second tournament was May Coronation, but the third one was March Crown, and I placed second in that, and they knighted me.
Oh.
Yeah, you got knighted really quickly.
Yeah, like 9 months.
Yeah. When did you invent the Bellatrix flat snap?
Right about that period. It was it wasn't the snap, the snap, the flat snap or the Bellatrix snap was sort of the first level of refinement. Because what I was doing before was just sort of a sidearm thing, but it still had all the power of a snap. And in those days, I was just swinging as hard as I could. I learned not to do that pretty quickly, and so I haven't since.
What was the evolution for you in coming up with your own technique?
Well, I'm one of these people that like to take apart systems, put them back together, and refine them and advance them. And I was already a very experienced judo player. I had a black belt that I got in '67, and I'd been playing ever since. And it turns out that all the power generation and the timing and stuff from judo just fits perfectly into what we do. You're actually throwing a sword. There's one, if I was doing a shoulder throw in judo, I'd have the guy's arm over my shoulder and I'd be in this position at one point in the swing. And if I'm doing a teardrop return, there you are, right there. And it just flows from that. And then I'd see what I was doing and say, that's something I should do. And then I'd look at it closer and a technique would come out of it.
So were you focusing on like techniques for power generation and to like save your body, or were you also like incorporating footwork? Was it a whole methodology?
Well, I wasn't doing much in the way of footwork because judo footwork works just fine for this game. And that's what I teach now. And I've been teaching it for a while. I was basically, getting used to these weapons and what can I do with them? Well, how can I make it better? How can I make it faster, harder, trickier, and so on? And I just come up with things. The next technique was the single hip. No, I guess it was a teardrop. Yeah, then the single hip.
What was your process? Did you just go out on the Pell and experiment?
Yeah. I'd basically I'd get the idea. I'd be doing something, and I would then notice I was doing it, and I would think, I need to do something about this. And that looks interesting, and then I'd go play with it and refine it and see how it was. And in the practice in those days, if anybody came up with a new technique, the first thing we do is everybody would talk about it. And we'd have a group think at practice, how can we modify that? What are the options? How do you defend against it? How do you overcome the defenses? It was really, really a nice environment for learning these things.
That's really cool. So who at that time was at that practice?
James wasn't, and I think he had his own practice. He'd show up once in a while. And Duke Henrik never came to it. None of the four established Dukes. Then James and I became the fifth and sixth Duke. But it was a lot of the good, the top end fighters. At one point, shortly, a few years later, we had the hypothetical 11-person melee team. With the middle, the wings, and the reserves. And House Chaos could have taken on the Kingdom. We were good enough. So like Sir Stephen McKeever was one of them, William Malucky, another, Andrew Riga. I think those are the ones you probably have heard about.
So when you started back in the 70s, how big were the crown lists and what was the format?
Usually fewer than 30, and it was a single elimination, pure single elimination.
Was it bring your best?
Yeah. No, I think that didn't come in for a long time. I mean, any other weapon required.
So did you win your first couple of Crown Sword and Shield, or with your bastard sword thing?
No, Sword and Shield was the first couple, and then I started. I can't remember which order it came in. It was either two sword and then glaive, or glaive and then two sword. I think it was two sword then glaive, and then it was just a mix of things until I developed the greatsword style. That was right about just before I met Sue, my wife, and I fought 3 crowns with greatsword style once I developed it, and I came in quarters, semis, and all 6 losses were to left-handers. And then I figured out the minute little change I had to make. Now I could eat left-handers alive. And Sue didn't want to be queen, so I didn't fight crowns for another 15 years.
So were you the only person fighting greatsword at the time, or was there anybody else playing with that weapon style?
There were a few people, but it was always a secondary weapon. Pretty much it was a sword, and we used a lot more weapons. Axe and mace were pretty common. Two sword was an innovation. People would fight with two sword, but I mean, they never really developed any real style with it. And the great weapons and the glaive, we had all sorts of weird things. I had a flail for a while. Once I let somebody hit me with it, I outlawed them.
I was going to say, are you the one that outlawed it?
Yes, I was. I had one that had a handle about, maybe 2 feet, and then it had 2 eye bolts that together, and the head was about this long, and it was covered with about 2 or 3 inches of soft foam, I just around there. And when I finally let somebody hit me with it at the top of my head, it drove me to my knees and I saw stars. And I said, I've been doing this to people. And I just outlawed it.
So now that you're talking about outlawed weapons, I have a question about the quarterstaff. Like, was that something that was experimented with and then also too dangerous?
Yeah, and it's too easy to win with.
Oh,
If you're trying to fight our style of sword and shield, and you give somebody else a quarterstaff, you're in for a fight. Because they can hit you at both ends. We actually outlawed this technique where you hit with the butt. That was an interesting one too. There was a fellow in Caid named Hagar the Bear, and he was aptly named. And he was fighting Sir Alfred from Sacramento, who was in like transition plate. He weighed about 190, 200 pounds. And Hagar was fighting with a glaive, but reversed, so he had the butt spike forward. And he came with the blade like this and caught Alfred right under the edge of his helmet. I was marshaling that fight, and Alfred's feet were 18 inches off the ground.
Wow.
And then he flipped over and sprained his neck, and we just said, no more. And the strange thing is that's disappeared from the marshal's handbooks over the years. Nobody was doing it, and then everybody forgot about it and took it out of the manuals, and now I guess it's legal now.
Until somebody else gets pulled up.
Until somebody else gets hurt.
So I have a question about shields, because when I look back at some of the older pictures, there's a lot of side mounted rounds and bunny rounds and things like that. Were you instrumental in different kinds of shields, and how did you guys come up with what you were going to use?
I did a lot of playing around in the early days. I went from, one time I had like a 30-inch side mounted round, which is ridiculous. And some heaters and stuff. And I finally settled on what I call it a sort of round. I'd take a 2-foot square, draw diagonals, and then I'd extend one diagonal 2 inches and squeeze the other diagonal 2 inches. So it was like a 22 by 26 sort of oval. It's not quite an oval. And then I'd mount it so the edge was just past my elbow, and I had about this much extra on this end because I punch block and I block with this end, so it gave me 6 inches more blocking range.
Was punch blocking something that you developed as well?
Yes, that's an integral part of my style.
And that too is just experiment?
Yeah, it came pretty quickly though, because the style when I came in was rotation blocking. You rotated down, you rotated up. And that pretty much went away when I developed the single hip, which was so fast that you could block the first blow and the second one would hit you right then, right as soon as your shield dropped below. And so you had to go out and get things. And then we just developed it over when we got into slow work. Slow work is probably the cornerstone of my teaching style. It just came easier and easier and easier and easier.
So at some point, did you implement like a drill practice? Is that something that the House Chaos did?
We had a very structured practice, actually. We would do instruction, and people would work on a technique, and that's where we had these little. Somebody would come up with something new, and we'd all stop and look at it and talk about it. So we did teaching then, and then we do slow work, and it's rhythmic, slow work, and then we get on into not full speed fighting, but it wasn't free for all. It was okay. You're limited in this respect. You have to attack. You have to defend. You got a minute. You have 3 blows. You have all the blows you need. Stuff like that. And some other drills came later that were just individual drills. We didn't have PELs. We had PELs, but they weren't movable. We couldn't bring them around to the practices. And at the very end, we did free fighting. And the practice was on a little piece of, there was a river that went by, and the road was straight, the river was curved, and a little oval, half oval of grass there. And they had this wonderful little bridge. It was about 3 people across. It had walls that were about 4 feet high. And at the end, they had a stairway that went up like that. And it was just a whole lot of fun.
Cool.
So you did both melee training as well as single.
Oh yeah.
tournament.
And we trained with the other weapons for a long while. Between coronations and crowns, you fight with your best weapon, which is by and large sword and shield with everybody then. And between crowns and coronations, anything but. So you got a lot of maces, axes, two sword and glaive, and so on and so forth. And the flails.
When did crown tourney evolve into a double limb?
I think that was my second reign. And I came up with it and said, this is the way we're going to do it. And I got all sorts of shit for it. And everybody loved it. So,
What was the reasoning for you changing it?
well, I thought that, it would make it a little less stress on you losing a fight because you had 2. When you get to the second one, but at least it would reduce it a bit and people got more fighting in those days. You walk out there and you're fighting somebody good and they one-shot you and then your day's over.
Right.
This way you got another chance.
So what are some of the other things that you implemented when you were king?
Well, the way we ran the lists, actually. When I was being trained in judo in our school, they not only trained you in fighting, they trained you in judging, refereeing, and tournament directing. And there was a system we used. It's common to intercollegiate type wrestling. Is it's more complex there. They fight it on the 6 bad point system. So if you win a match by a throw or a pin, you don't get any points. If you get pinned or thrown, you get 3. If you win by decision, you get 1 point. If you lose by decision, you get 2. When you add up to 6, you're out. So it's a little simpler with this game. If you get 2 losses, you're out, so it's easier. But what you do is you make a list of all the fighters. And then the rule is the first fighter unattached that hasn't been assigned a match fights the first one under them who hasn't. So first round, 1 fights 2, 3 fights 4, and so on. In round 2, then 1 fights 3, 2 fights 4. And then you set up the numbering again for each round. And if you get a bye, your name goes to the top of the list. So instead of fighting the byes, the person that got the bye gets the very next fight in the first round or the next round. And we just eliminate people as they get their 2 losses.
When did challenging in for the first round get implemented?
Somewhere right about then, a little after that, still in the early to mid 70s, probably.
I like that. That's a cool tradition.
I like it a lot. Now,
And I think a lot of kingdoms still do that if they don't fight pool style.
Yeah, the thing that's different from the Western crowns and from a lot of other crowns, we seed the crowns. So that list of people we name, we spread the dukes out as far as possible, then the counts, then the viscounts, then the knights. Then we'd invite unbelts to join the knights side because we needed even numbers. And then they would be in that seeding also. So there was no way somebody could luck their way into the finals. You had to fight your way through the cream of the chivalry to get there. Which is one reason we had an open list. So as long as the king said, okay, anybody can join.
And has the open list always been that way in the West?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Since way early 70s.
There's never been any kind of residency requirements or anything like that, even when the other kingdoms grew up?
No. Of course, there was, when I joined, my first actual event after my first event after that first tournament was 12th Night, 1971. And it was announced that Adenvelt's next tournament would be a crown tournament. And before that, you only had the West, the Middle, and the East.
So what other traditions did you implement as king that you think are cool or that you're the most proud of?
Well, I sort of focus on the fighting. So I think the rule changes I've made, outlawing flails, target substitution, uh, hitting with the back with the striking in of glaive with that motion. I'm sure there's a few others, but none of them come to mind right off the bat. Or the way the list is run, I really like that.
So you've reigned 8 times, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. When you decide to go for crown, do you change, or when you decided? Because before we got on, you told me your current wife doesn't have any desire to reign.
Well,
right?
she didn't. When I came back after that 15 years, which included the 5 years when I could not fight for medical reasons, I talked to her, said, "Look, I really want to fight crown." She said, "Okay, let's go ahead." And then she actually, before that, most of the tournaments she came to, she was dressed as a man. You know, just so that indistinct type range, and then she started wearing gowns and so on and so forth, and just change it. But by then I think I made the finals twice after I came back. Almost won one of them. Thank God I didn't. That was an interesting final. I was fighting Duke Havek, but he wasn't a Duke yet. And Havek's about 7 inches taller than me. And his legs come up to about here. And I've got this combination fighting with 2 swords. If you swing a forehand blow, you're dead. Because I cross block and then I hit here. And these 2 blows like that. And he fell in, he walked into it. And so I got to this point and I couldn't reach him. So I hit him in the leg, but everything else was several feet out of range.
That's cool. But anyway, when you decide to go for crown, is there a different mentality you have than just other tournaments for fun? And how do you get yourself in? No.
Anything you do to get focused on anything gets in the way of your fighting. I'm very much an Eastern martial artist, even in this game. And you try to get to the no mind where you're not focused on doing anything. You're just reacting with highly trained reactions.
So you don't change your training regime at all before you want to go for a crown? You just
No, I
continue.
don't. I mean, I always tried to do my best anytime that I was fighting. So, well, of course, you're fighting somebody you're training in a significantly lower level than you are. Yes, I'll change. But
so are you one of those people that just focus on being the best fighter you can be, and then my training goes that way?
What you want to get into is a space where you can divorce yourself from thinking or focusing on anything, and you become almost like the perfect receptor. Anything catches your attention, and then you have trained yourself in your techniques. It's sort of like somebody who's a master painter, and they're painting something. They reach out and grab the brush they need. Don't even look at it and do it. And somebody is a master wood maker. He needs a tool. He reaches out and grabs it and uses it perfectly. That's what I was going for.
So you've reigned 8 times. Why did you keep doing it, and what's your favorite part about reigning?
Well, I think I made numbers 5 and 6. I probably did it because I was too mature to stop. You know, I didn't think about it. Otherwise, I simply wouldn't have done it. And then Carol and I divorced, and then I was with Duchess Rowena, so I made her a duchess. And then I kept doing weird things. You know, I got the quarterfinals once left-handed sword and shield. I'm not left-handed, not ambidextrous either. You know, and all sorts of things like this. And if I would never throw a fight, but if I got up far enough in crown that I didn't want to go any further, I would handicap myself pretty thoroughly. You know, like fighting left-handed greatsword before I developed a greatsword style and stuff like that. You always had to work to beat me, but you know, it was less likely I would win.
So in the Western Rite Kingdoms, there's sort of an understanding that part of your job as a knight or a royal peer is to contest the list and Where did that come from, and do you ascribe to that view?
It probably came over up in general discussions, but way back when, when you make probably mid to late 70s, early 80s, something like this. When we really started looking at having an open list, you might have a duke from another kingdom come in, and it was your job to be there to guard the crown. I mean, it's if he won, great, or she won, great, but they had to be contested. You had to fight through the chivalry of the West to become the king of the West. And in that, if I'd have won too many fights and I was getting up like that, and somebody from another kingdom was my opponent, I would have gone flat out with my best weapons. I don't think handicapping yourself is really all that bad, because tournaments, I consider tournaments as a training situation, even a crown tournament. And I want to improve all my weapons. And so it was a little tougher to win with glaive. It was a little tougher to win with greatsword, and so on and so forth.
Can you explain that a little bit more, like how you use tournaments for training?
Well, that's sort of the pinnacle of fighting. Crown tournaments, especially, you got the best trying to do their best. I try to do my best all the time, but your opponents don't always do that. And that's the nice little, like they call it, the crucible. That's it. That's the best stuff. That's the highest level you could train yourself against. And I think that's important. And for lower level fighters, even if they're not going to win, that's why the West never had any residency requirements or anything else. You want to enter crown, you enter crown, because it trained you to get better at fighting in a tournament or against a opponent who really wanted to beat you.
And has the West always had 3 crowns a year?
Yeah. Radnor was going to change it one time, and I was one of the advisors who advised against it, because we had taken the temperature of the knights and fighters, and they weren't going to go for it, to go to two a year, and it just never came up again.
So do you know why the East Kingdom, because they were the second, why did they decide to go 6 instead of 4, since there was already an established 4?
I had no communications with the East personally, so I can't tell you.
I didn't know if you were around and had discussions. So
Well, they were a kingdom for some years before I got there, so they probably settled on it already. I don't know why. I think the West was a little bit more. It was more compressed. Basically, it was San Francisco and the immediate environs. So 98% of the people lived within a 1.5 hour drive at the center of the kingdom. That's not true of the East, and that's not true of the Middle either.
I think it's interesting that as the different areas calved off, they all went to 2 crowns a year and didn't follow the tradition. It's just I don't expect you to know why. I just
didn't know if maybe there had ever been a discussion on it. So
I think there's just personally, I just think it's so much. It's a lot easier to do, not on the people that get to win and have to do it for 6 or 12 months, but it's a lot easier to arrange 2 a year than it is 3 a year. Because with the 3 a year, you get one done, you start preparing for the next one right now. That gets hard.
That's true. It's quite a burden to run all the events.
And now, especially in the West now, because it's got 2 principalities within an hour, 2 hour drive, then so now you've got, and they, I think, I don't know if they do 2 or 3 a year, but in any case, you gain a lot more important tournaments. And now, like in the West, it's probably worse than even on tier, where you can choose between 4 or 5 events every weekend. It just gets, the calendar gets too full.
Yeah, we have some issues with how large we are right now.
Yeah, that's true, and it's tough. And you got this. It's sort of a trade-off between when you're a bigger kingdom, you get more ways things can interact, and it's sort of cool that way. When you get 30 or 40 knights come up in the collar of steel, God, that's so cool. but then it's so much trouble to get the calendar to work. You want to split it apart so it doesn't have to do so much.
So when
But-
did the principalities come into play?
Oh, I really don't know. Somewhere in the 80s, or probably somewhere in the 80s. We thought it'd be nice to make a principality in
Alaska?
the Sacramento area, because that was the second largest area. And my thinking and the thinking when we made that was that we didn't need one for the mist because basically it was the center of the kingdom. And then I got off the throne, and the seneschal at the time persuaded the next king to make a principality and around there. I was pissed, but so what?
Let's see. What role does your consort play on tourney day?
She acts to be a consort. She comes out and lets me salute her and dedicate the fight to her. She watches the fights. She greets me when I come back off the field, make sure I'm taken care of if my squires haven't already done so. Talks to me to see if I'm having any emotional stress or anything like this. And runs the household. That's a big thing. For a long time, we had it. The household itself wasn't so big, but we had a lot of people that were not in the household, but were part of the camping group and part of what we did. And we like to play host and hostess, and we did that even after Sue and I married, we were still doing that for a good while, and we liked it. And she was the lady of the house, and that's a big role. You have to make everybody feel good. You make sure everybody's taken care of, and so on and so forth.
How has the ceremony or the regalia for knighthood changed over the years? I was talking to somebody today, and they said that Sir Trudy was actually the first buffet ever, and I had never heard that before.
I honestly don't know, but I'm completely against the buffet. I do not like it one little bit. I do not watch when it's performed. It's a personal thing. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it grabs me inside and it hurts. So I just don't want to deal with it.
When you were king, did you ever buffet anyone?
Once. And I can do a full swing and it'll feel like a tap. And I did.
Well, it's supposed to be symbolic, right? I mean, we're not really supposed to be hurting each other.
It really is. And you hear some just horrendous stories from other parts of the known world, I think there was a knight back somewhere in the middle, and he was going to be knighted, and his friend who was now king, and he had made the king promise he wanted a full punch in the face, right in the teeth. And when his friend got off the plane, he says, "Well, now you're not gonna pussy out and not hit me hard, are you?" And we're going, "Oh, geez." One of the things that bothers me about that is I know exactly what I could do to somebody with a full hand slap, and it would probably be a concussion if he got off that lucky. Break a jaw, rupture an eardrum. I just don't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, I get it. When did the vigil come into being? Do you remember?
That was probably in the 90s, I think, early 90s maybe. I'm really bad on remembering days, periods of time, but yeah, it was sort of later on. I sort of like it. I do. I didn't have a chance for it but I think it's a good thing.
When you were knighted, were you given any legacy regalia?
There wasn't any legacy.
No, there wasn't any yet. Okay.
Yeah, they had a little suitcase that was about like this, that had been various kings and queens had been painted on there, and that was the regalia. And they had linen two belts with just a ring on the end, and that was and then had lamp chains, for your knight's chain. That was it.
And there weren't spurs then at that time? Were they doing spurs?
I don't think so. I don't think so. That came along pretty quick though. And there may have been some people that had, but I mean, in my case, it was just ad hoc nighting and nobody knew what was going on. And so nothing was prepared for it. They didn't tell you either. They didn't tell you in advance for any of the peerages. They just called you up in court and into the ceremony, which I found rather distressing later on. But
I've had a surprise and a planned, so I'm not sure which I prefer, which I liked better.
I don't like surprises. I just don't.
My shoulders
wine,
are from years.
I'm sorry.
I just said every time I'm surprised, my shoulders go up to my ears because I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah, me too. Actually, it's just. I mean, if I have a bottle of wine and it's a lot better than I think it's going to be, and it's a surprise, that I like. But
Yes.
not surprise birthday parties or surprise nightings or whatever the heck,
So when did you figure out that you loved to teach and train?
I liked it all the way back in judo. It's just, I just really like to help people learn things. And I've developed a system over the years that, just consider, I'm really, really dedicated to improving the art in any way I can possibly do it. And that's not only developing techniques, but developing training techniques, finding 10 ways of telling somebody how to do something to try to get so they can understand it. Like I had probably like 10 years ago, I had a knight ask me to help them with their glaive work, and they didn't use my style of glaive. And I said, okay. And they also were an intensely kinesthetic learner. And he says, tell me what I have to do, and then don't talk to me until I ask a question. And so if I needed to correct the movements, I'd literally take and move his hands or move his shoulder or something like that, because he got confused if you talk to him.
Interesting. So
it's just really fun developing the system. Like the way I've got it now, I come up with a new technique about every month or so. It's interesting to hear these posts. Well, Paul's a good teacher, but he's sort of behind the times. And nobody knows what I teach. If I haven't taught you, you don't know 3/4 of the techniques I teach, because they're different. Like I got an invitation to teach what would have been earlier this month, and the local fighters wanted to do fighting, and then I could critique it. And I said, well, look, we're both talking about language instruction. You're speaking Spanish, I'm teaching Russian. And that's about where I'm at right now.
Explain that.
We're both doing the same things, like you want to hit the offside. Okay, you do it this way. I do it so different, it's not even the same technique. Well, it isn't the same technique. And so if somebody, and even the tactics, mainly what people do is they scoot up so they're just in range or just barely out of range, and then they play who's quickest. I don't do that. I teach attacking from out of range. So you get to make the opponent do something whether they want to or not. And then you can build off that.
When Sagan was living in the West, did you guys ever collaborate at all?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
He was my squire.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he was.
I was going to ask, who were some of your squires that have gone on to teach and gain a lot of renown in the society? Besides Sagan, obviously.
Well, most of the West in the late 70s and 80s, basically I changed the whole style of the West. Everybody fought my style pretty much. Dick Stephen of Beckenham is probably one of the top end people in the style of the system, actually, because he fights a different style than I do, but he uses all the basic techniques and stuff. Yes, he's probably the one I really like to watch. It's just fun to watch him fight. It's fun to fight him. It's really just like dancing. And we find each other blocking blows that you didn't think you could block, and it's just fun. Brian and Stefan, obviously. Sagan didn't do well in tournaments. He had He had turn each up real bad, and we never quite got him out of that. But he's a much better coach than I am. I'm a better teacher, but he's a better coach, and so we collaborated a lot that way. Yeah, but Lee, most of the Dukes up till the mid '80s or late '80s, either were taught by me or my students, or Radnor.
I was going to ask about Radnor
Yeah,
specifically.
Radnor. See,
I had a class by him too once a long time ago.
Yeah, see, he used the basis of my style because I was training him up, and then he went his own way because he can do things physically I can't do, just flat out can't do. I can do things he can't do. So we have sort of the same basis, and we split. That was a little more of a split than most, though. And he's also had to have surgically repaired one bicep tendon, and half of another one's gone. My techniques don't cause that.
So when I first started fighting, I have to say that having your manual online, because I didn't start until the late 90s, was a huge boon. Like, that was amazing that you did that and that you put it out there for everyone. Was there something that triggered you writing a manual and starting a website and a school? I mean, it was like the Bellatrix fighting school, right?
Yeah. Well, the society has spread apart. I mean, especially in the early days, like Saskatoon, Saskatchewan brought me up to teach, and real isolated. I think they had to drive 8 hours to the next group, and that was a small shire, and another 12 hours to the next group. I mean, so they were in the middle of nowhere, and how are they going to learn? So I wrote the manual so that if you were out in the middle of nowhere and had nobody to teach you, you could it is painful, believe me, walk through the instructions and learn how to do something. And I wanted to provide that for people.
Well, the pictures and everything, I mean, it just your manual was so well thought out.
Thank you.
I would say that. I used it as well.
That's good. Thank you too. Yeah, the book, of course, is pretty much the culmination, and I refined it a lot more than I ever did the manual. I go through, and if what I was talking about didn't flow for me, if I had any little questions or I sort of slid over that explanation, I took all those out and I made the proper explanations, and I actually researched it. One of my squires, I wasn't going to have any squires on here because my involvement in events is going down, especially with my physicality having so much problems. And so I only knighted the two I have because they were so far out of the mainstream and it wasn't going to be appropriate for anybody else to. Well, at one point in his life, he was a rocket scientist, literally. He worked for Jet Propulsion Laboratories. And so I knew that certain techniques I did were using certain principles of physics, and I knew it worked, but like some of them, I didn't quite know why it worked. And so we had a very long talk about that, and figured out it was sort of interesting how to do it. One of the interesting things is this technique where I come around like that. The power is applied on the backswing, and then you reduce the radius, and that's like a skater bringing in their arms and they're spinning, and everything goes faster. But then when it goes over your head, it's going away from you, and the radius is getting longer. And what I had been doing is when it goes over my head, I actually pull my hand sideways to maintain the center of the circle and the tension on the radius or on the diameter. And having my squire explain what was going on at that thing was really interesting. And basically, if I did that and maintained the curve with that tension, all the power that I had gotten off that thing maintained its strength and speed. If, as most people do, they come back and then they try to hammer the blow forward, you actually lose all that. And now your sword is moving at the speed of your hand, which is not what you want. But it's counterintuitive in the extreme.
Right. I mean, all the I've been studying power generation for probably a decade, like super closely, because as a woman, whether or not I actually have power generation issues, I'm always told I have power generation issues. So I have studied it quite a bit, and there's all sorts of different ways to generate power, but it all comes down to the physics, right? Like you either have the circle in your hand or you have the circle at your shoulder. I mean, and it's all about loose grip and relaxing so that you're only using the muscles that you need to use so that the sword can actually have the energy, right?
Well, part of that's half of it. The other half is the biomechanics.
Right, right.
So what I did is I started eliminating the muscle, the smaller, weaker muscles, fingers, wrist, elbow, shoulder. So everything I do is core based. That's how the power is applied. Everything, all the hand and arms do is change directions. And I don't use that loose grip here. Let me tell you a story about that in a minute. I use the bottom two. It's like using a hammer.
Yeah, I change.
Yeah. This grip here, and you'll see people, especially from the eastern part of the country, they will insist the snap, you hold on like this and you pull it forward and then you snap your fingers. And unfortunately, I'm the one that started that, but it wasn't a snap. It was in my very first manual that was mimeographed, and the illustrations were literally life drawings. I posed for them, and I included the picture of this one little technique, and I said it very clearly: only use this technique in this one little specific instance. And that was where if somebody was on their knees and they kept letting their shield drift down, you could just hold your sword on your shoulder and just go whop like that. That became the snap for the entire eastern part of the society. And it's still being taught that way in a lot of places. That never was a snap. Never, 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 never. But and all, you know, the hip rotation thing, that's a core thing. And I'm the one that came up with that too. I don't do it anymore because I realized about 10, 15 years ago, I wasn't doing it. And it was working better than it was when I was doing it.
I think that I just having a conversation with you, that a lot of people get confused with hip rotation, and really it's more about bringing the energy up through your feet and using your core to shift it.
Yeah, you know, you sort of have to go from your feet up, because what are you pushing against?
Right.
I think my stuff would work in anti-gravity, but or no gravity. But it wouldn't be that as effective, because I'd do a snap and my body would fly the other way.
I just have this visual of you in like an anti-gravity room.
Yeah, just well, do you ever meet Alfred of Carlisle?
I have heard of him.
I have heard of him. I've never met him.
Well, he was a Viscount in the West, but he was from the East before, or I think he was East. And he worked at some place that had a tie line. It was basically a flat fee telephone line. You could use it forever. You never paid anything else, but only companies had those. And he would call me at night from his company and have these hours long conversations on the screwiest ideas he'd come up with. And we happened to meet at one time at Lily's, and he was fighting a completely square stance. Both his feet were square, right with each other. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, you know, you want to get both feet in the game." I said, "Well, yeah, but no, they don't have anything to push against." And he says, "Well, then what do you do? What's the most important thing?" I said, "Well, probably balance." And he says, "What? Well, what do you mean?" And so I said, "Okay, pull your shield up," and I jumped in the air and threw a snap at him. So I'm simply using my weight, because when I throw a snap, besides body movement to get the weight moving to start the sword, it is some rotation, but it's from the other side of your body. It's not this side, it's this side. So just my muscular tension rotating from the core there gave me the power for the snap. But I like to be sitting on the ground so I can actually use that too. But mainly for me, it's right now, I use my for the forward swings, I use my core to move my body just about a half inch towards about 11 o'clock. And I let my weight drop at the same time. And that's probably 90% of the power right there. Because it just yanks, it's like standing on a dock, tying an anchor to your ankle and throwing it over. And that's pretty much what I'm doing. On the backward swings, the arm is guiding it to the side so I get the long radius. But what I'm really doing is basically a headbutt. By taking my core muscles and move my upper body just like that. And again, it's only like a half inch, but that your weight that's 100 times what the sword weighs, moving a half inch really fast really gives you a lot of power. And that provides the input for these power generators, the curves that it goes around.
Agreed. Let's see. We got off topic a little bit, but that's okay because this is the stuff you're passionate about, and we should be talking about your passion.
So do you do anything else besides fighting in the SCA? Do you have any other interests?
Heraldry, actually. I used to be pretty interested in heraldry, and then I just didn't have any time to deal with it.
So mostly book heraldry, court heraldry?
Book heraldry.
Heraldry?
Actually, long time ago, I don't know, some back in the early 80s, they had a martial arts pentathlon, and they had other events besides fighting. And I won the heraldry one, among other things.
I'm very fond of heraldry as well.
Oh, I am too. That's a kick. It really is.
That's funny because I was just thinking about that I want to have an event with a fighting pentathlon. And that's cool that it's been done before. So that some of the events were not fighting related.
Well, back in the old days, when you were knighted, you were expected to have the arts of a gentleman or gentlewoman. You had to dance, you had to be just like a sergeant's trial. You had to dance, you had to entertain, you had to recognize heraldry and be able to blazon it. That would just take one from each field. I'd love that. Actually, when I got knighted, of course, I've only been in the society 9 months, and I didn't know anything about this. So I found a herald and started learning heraldry. And I didn't know any dances. So I found a dance instructor, got a place to have it, and started having weekly dance practices so I could learn how to dance, because a knight should be able to dance. And I think a little more of that is would be good these days.
Well, I'm going to think on it.
Dancing.
I'm sorry?
I would like to see more dancing. We used to have a regular dance practices where I live, and it was always a lot of fun.
Yeah, I found out I didn't like it much. I liked the pavans, but that was about it. But later on, as society got more mature, and some of the dances they've come up with are just gorgeous. And I would love to have done that, but just ran out of time.
So Sagan says hello. He's watching.
Oh, hi, Sagan.
So do you think there's a difference in responsibilities between being a knight and being a duke?
Yeah, there is actually. Dukes have all the responsibility and knights have, but there's this added requirement that I think you are responsible for helping out these poignant moments to happen. You show up at somebody's vigil, or you do anything, by and large, that demonstrates a knightly virtue, and because it's you're a duke and you did that, it has more effect sometime on the audience. I basically don't like to be on center stage particularly, but I realize that as a duty for me. I have to do that. I do not like wearing this thing, and I don't most of the times, but I wear it every time it's appropriate, because that's my job.
You know what? You're so recognizable that I think you're always Duke Paul, whether you have that on or not.
Yeah, that's becoming less and less, especially back east.
So I'm supposed to ask you about a fistful of yen.
Oh, that was a kick. Way back when, there was a group in Fresno, California, which is pretty much in the sticks. And it was one of these, you find these isolated groups, and very few of them are in the middle of things. You really get really bad groups or really good groups. And this was probably one of the jewels of the history of the society. They had two couples who were both very charismatic, really into everything, and talented. It was Duke Douglas and Serena of Cawdor, and their wives, Lorna, Lorna and Nancy. And they would have enthusiasms, and the whole group would get behind them. Like one, I remember they saw the movie Zulu. A month later, they had a Venetian tea party in period garb.
Cool.
A whole shire. And they kept doing things like this. They had the first Laurel Armor was in their group. And one of the people, Richard Monagani, he's actually one of Henrik's friends, became my friend eventually. And Jeffrey Broken Blade, who was, again, one of the same thing. I met him through Henrik and Rick. They wanted to take a spaghetti Western, which basically are based on Japanese samurai movies, and make a samurai movie out of it. And it was set like an outdoor setting. It was an outdoor bar, and you had the bandits all who inhabited the bar, and then the samurai with no name would come in and kill them all. And they had Olaf the Mediocre was the barkeep. He's about close to 400 pounds and big guy. And then they had another guy who was even bigger as the sumo geisha. And they made him up like a geisha. His obi was about this wide. It seemed about right. And they made up his hair and a little decorative pins going through it. So, and always hit his face around, have a big black beard. And basically, a merchant comes in, they kill him, they take his money, and then you hear the music from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and everybody sort of looks around and nothing happens. And then you hear the horse beat like this, and then I'm standing there. And I come in, order tea, and they want to get a rise out of me, so they make fun of me. And everybody comes and challenges me, and I just cut them in pieces. And then walk away.
So what happened to this film?
Oh, yeah.
I've got a copy of it. Unfortunately, the original, the sound did not come through at all. It was just, so it had to be completely redubbed. But we have movies of that. It's Super 8. It's really old, and now it's on. I think I got it on either CD or videotape, so it's still around.
I'm telling you, if they have Sport of Kings next year, we should watch that for movie night.
I agree. I think that would be fantastic.
You got to get Henrik. Henrik, I think, should show that to you.
Okay.
Actually, he was part of the organizing group for making the film. He actually made the swords because they were all birch swords, and they were painted high gloss silver, and that was like they do in the movies. And most of the handles and guards were actually made out of foam plastic and duct taped up with black tape and stuff like this. And all the principals, Rick Monagani, who was one of the two main people doing it, is a sword collector. And so we had real handles and real subas, and in the close-ups we had real blades. But you couldn't, when you were fighting with these things, you could not touch the blades. One of them would break. So and there was only
I think you should Dropbox it to me, and then we can caption it like a silent movie, and then we can put it on YouTube.
I like that idea.
I would have to talk to Rick about that first, because it's his property,
Oh.
But I'll ask him.
But I mean, this is like history stuff that I think needs to be shared and enjoyed.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie company that did it was 10th Century Ham, like Duke Henrik of Ham.
Oh my God.
It was a real kick. It just really was. So I'll make it a note, make it a point to ask Rick if it's okay, and then I can get you a copy.
Oh, I mean, I would totally do it. I would, but don't go out of your way, because I don't know.
Oh, I don't agree with her. I say go out of your way. I think it would be fantastic.
Okay, go out of your way, please. All right. God, we're running late, but I knew that we were going to run long with you because you have so much to talk
That's
about.
okay, I don't mind.
Yeah. Okay. God. So
We're going to talk about your sword and your constructions of your sword.
yeah, let's talk about your sword.
Okay, so here's a completed sword. When I thought I used 40-inch swords. Now I teach 36-inch because it's more economical for the rattan. And what I do is I try to get as tip heavy a blade as I can manage out of this. I use the lightest rattan I can get, and then I make a tip heavy blade. And the way I do that is I add edging. So this is seat belt. And I put that on the last 16 inches, stopping right under the tip. The seat belt's a lot heavier than the same size nylon strapping. It's probably 2 or 3 times the weight. And that's usually all I need. If I need any more weight, I'll usually put a piece of heavy leather back where this yellow thing is on the back of the, you can't even see that, can you?
Yeah, you can. I was going to ask if that's the front of the blade or the back of the blade.
That's the back of the blade. And what I want to get besides a handle tip balance, I want to get a front edge, back edge balance. So these swords with that front edge, back edge balance are very lively. They go around corners really, really well. And then the other thing I do is I use this lanyard here. It's attached in front of the hilt, and you put your hand through it like this. So it's around your wrist, and then you grab the sword. And it holds your hand right at the bottom of the forearm. And again, my system, you take the small muscles out of the game. That takes the wrist and the hand out of the game. If you're holding like this, it just doesn't move. But boy, I was at Penzic probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I used to teach these big techniques classes. Or 2 hours, I get 40 or 50 people, which is insane. And that particular one, there were a lot of women fighters there. And I used to take like 20 of those things in an earlier version, and I'd give them out at Penzic. And I'd give them out, like, find groups of the people, and I give one to one of the groups so I could go back in. And I got there a little early, and people got there a little early, and I was letting people try a sword that had that thing on it. And every time I gave it to a woman fighter, they got this really devilish grin on their face.
Was that in 2006? Because I'm pretty sure I was there.
Might well have been. I have a hideous memory for these things, so I can't really tell you. But it's a really incredible device to have on your sword. And as far as the construction goes, I'll take a piece of rattan, and I'll draw the lines on the front and back that I consider the edges. And since I got to play with the thing, I actually label which is the back edge, and I label which is the tip on that. And after I've done those lines all the way around, then I'll put a basket hilt on it, just fit it on like this. And I'll draw a circle right at the front and right at the back. So you can see the circles there. And then you can't really see it on this one, but that big thick line, this edge is a 1/4 inch from the center, and so is that edge. So it's basically a 1/2 inch line. And on this one, it's a 1 inch line. And then right down at the bottom, I will cut across the bottom of this between where it touches this line and where it touches this line. And then I shave the handle down there, sort of gradually here and then on the flat sides. And what I'm trying to get is a cross section like this. So my hand goes around that blade. You can see the one that's actually carved. So my hand goes around that blade, and this set of knuckles goes right across that front edge. And so I know exactly where my front edge is all the time. If you find somebody with a little smaller hands, I found that they tend to like ones that are a little thicker instead of the real thin ones like this. I don't pretend to know why, but it gives them more to hold on to, I think. And that thing where it was explained that women and men have different hands, which is completely not true biomechanically. What happens is you get somebody with smaller fingers or shorter fingers, and they can't reach around as far. So you have to angle the blade at a different place so it will be front on when they hit. That's all you have to do. There's
Yeah,
no-
I
no great
camp my
secret.
blade just a little bit in the basket hilt because otherwise I get a bruise on my hand from it.
Yeah, well,
I don't
that's
know why.
probably the same thing. And I got monstrous hands, so I can't count everything being like mine.
So why do you cover your sword in athletic tape and not duct tape?
It's a little lighter, and in the early days when we didn't have rattan with the rind on it, I was going through a rattan every 1 or 2 practices, and I would take like strapping tape, and I'd run about 6 layers all the way up, tip and down, back and forth like that. And then the athletic tape actually provides support without breaking. It flexes a little bit and still provides support, and it looks pretty.
So
that's
you
what
don't spiral wrap with your.
I do spiral wrap with the nowadays. I'll when I put the edging on, this edging here, I will actually do parallel pieces, because otherwise it's wide. It goes all the way around to here, and you'll get where it sticks out and you'll get ripples. So I put it, and I'll take the halves of that, then the halves of those things, and I'll put it all just with straight pieces. And then the rest of it, I spiral wrap with the strapping tape. And then I spiral wrap from the bottom up, because then the edges of the tape all face this way and they don't tear up quite as easily. And then so I'm using, this is gaffer's tape for the black, or Gorilla tape. Really good tape, 25 bucks a roll, because it doesn't go away. I mean, I've put the black, the rings on my Pell. The rest of the Pell was duct tape, and I used it for a few years, and then I moved up here and I gave it to one of my squires. He let it stand out in the rain, and all the duct tape disintegrated and all the pieces of black were there and you couldn't tell.
Yeah, duct tape definitely disintegrates in the Pacific Northwest. That's for sure.
Yeah, and down in California when it rains too, but that doesn't rain as much. The big thing that the difference is, and you see a lot of discussions about where to put the balance point of the blade, and you see people who are telling you to put it right down by the tip because it makes it easier to handle, and it does. But the physics, you're swinging a mass around that circle and playing with the radius. The more mass you have, the further out, the harder it hits.
So where's your balance point then?
My balance point on these is up here. Yep, 6-8 inches above the hilt. If I could get them out there further, I would. But if you use a big enough piece so that it gets heavier out there, you've got a sword that's too heavy for some people to use. So I buy 1.25 inches, and then I add the edging out here that I want. So if this were my sword, I would probably put another layer of strapping or of seat belt on the back, because I use steel hilts, and that gets it out. I can get it out to about 5 inches. That's the best I can do.
So you don't actually use a plastic hilt, you'll use a steel hilt?
I use steel hilts.
And is that aesthetics or?
It's aesthetics. Okay. Yeah, it's the same way, like I never reduced my armor when it became good enough that I didn't get hit much. I kept the same armor I wore the whole damn career. My leather armor that I still have, that I was using in 71 when I got an armor the last time, was made in 78. And I still wore that. The legs went through steel leather, because my back got so bad I couldn't use steel legs. But the leather I made was double thickness, with bull shoulders, about almost 3/8 inches thick. You figure to wear armor. It's armored combat, and you should wear armor to do it, even though you don't need all of it, because that's part of the game. But that's my opinion.
So I'm going to backtrack just for a second because I have to ask you a question about your sons. I don't know if pride is the right word, but like how, I guess, how much pride do you get that they've followed in your footsteps and they've both been, pretty successful and good humans. And I mean, Brian is like the fiercest, well, he's a very fierce two-sword fighter and sword and shield fighter. Um, so I just wonder, like
I'm incredibly proud of my sons, and I think they have grown up to be good people. Their achievements in fighting is very, it's nice for me. I enjoy that. I'm proud of them for that too. But that's secondary. I'd rather them be a good person than to be a good fighter. And I used to have somebody that I would point to be an example of the knight you wanted to emulate. And then I changed that to Brian about 20 years ago, because he really is. I mean, I think he's a better knight than I ever thought of being.
well, he's so thoughtful and considerate, and he's always willing to admit if he feels like he made a wrong step. And I think that's just like so important for peers in general, not just knights,
Yes.
to own it, because we're all human, right?
Yeah, we all make mistakes, but you got to own it. You have to own it.
Yeah. He's definitely one of the people I look to do it right.
Yeah. And by and
I
large,
don't know
he
him
does.
very well, but he's always been wonderful to me, and he taught me how to throw an offside properly. At Misty's house, at Sir Rithkin's house.
Oh,
I thought my daughter taught you.
No, she taught me how to do an IA when I fight.
Oh, sorry, that's an aside. Okay, so is there anything that I mean, because we could talk to you forever. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to talk about before we go to the final 10 questions?
I guess the only thing that bothers me is that a lot of people, especially accomplished fighters, seem to be so satisfied with their technique and their accomplishments with it that they don't look for other things. Basically, it's, oh, Paul's out of date, or Paul's stuff only works for big people, and it's not true. But they don't take the time to actually find out. So I have a hard time finding people to teach to.
Oh.
Especially if they're accomplished at all. I have one Duke actually back in Meridies who every once in a while calls me and we talk stick, but that's unique. Nobody else does. And I'm sort of sad about that, because like I said, I come up with a new technique about every month or 6 weeks.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you said that, I was just like, wow. So, I mean, this is your passion, and you're out there on the Pell figuring things out still, even though you're not actually in armor anymore because your back won't let you, right?
Well, I got these 2 squires, and it's sort of fun because we do a lot of slow work because we have a very small group here. And one of them fights with glaive and 2-sword, and the other is mainly sword and shield. And they've both gotten technically to a point where they're coming close to my level of tactical expertise. And so even in their slow work, and they get little pretty fast and slower, it's like me fighting myself with different weapons. And every once in a while, I'll be teaching over the other side of the room, and the 2 of them will walk over to me and say, oh, goody, because they've always come up with a problem they don't understand. And it's usually something I haven't considered, and usually once they bring the question, it's obvious what the answer is. And that's how the art goes up. I find, oh, this is what you do to that. Oh, this is what you do to that. I had to change the way that I attack great weapons because of my big squire who does glaive, because he's also accurate enough that at his maximum range he can pick which nostril he's going to hit. The first year he fought in Aerosolmus, he'd only been in armor like a month. The second year he won 9 of his 12 fights, and all of them were thrust, and 8 of them were the first move of the fight people would just walk in with they thought was safe and they weren't.
Which squire is that? What's his name?
That's Kyle. He's, the 6'8", 375 guy, probably like 4.25 now. And his name is Venadius.
Okay, Venadius.
And the other one was Toivo, and he changed his name because the heralds could never get it right. And he's now got I don't know, French German persona, and I can never remember his name because they haven't used it enough.
So if people want to buy your book, where do they find it?
TheBellatrixBook.com.
Okay.
You'll come up and you'll see 2 books, and you can order it from Amazon or the company that actually published it. We get money either way.
I was going to say, which way is more financially advantageous for you?
I'm not even sure that the publishing place is actually doing it anymore, but you could try them, and if not, go to Amazon.
Okay.
And also, even if you don't buy the book, up in the upper right-hand corner of that same webpage is companion video site. And that's where all the 150 some videos that correspond to the book are. And you can go on that site, you sign up, you create a login, it's free. And there's the book in an outline, and it tells you where all the videos go. And
I was going to ask you if there were companion videos, because I couldn't imagine that after you did your manual with all the pictures that you didn't have videos.
No, this time it's a semi-pro videographer, and they're all well done, lighting, editing. He's still working on the editing a year later, but we've got the non cleaned up stuff up there, and you can see everything now.
And so you all heard it, like, you buy the book, you watch the videos, and he wants to talk stick. So
yeah, and
hit him up.
At some point later, probably after my operation, I'm going to figure out, I've already been told where to go look, how to send out multiple emails, because they won't let you do them if you get too many. And the people that have signed up for the site, not necessarily bought the book, I'm going to start having discussion sessions about the book. I'll ask for questions in advance, and then I'll discuss the questions. And if we run out of things to talk about, I will have already prepared to talk about a section of the book that I'll talk about.
See, you could run like a Duke Paul book club, and you could use Zoom, and you guys could have a conversation.
That's exactly.
You could even watch the videos because you can share screen.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and you could do that through whatever, Facebook or whatever. You could, hit up that Known World virtual fight practice site, and
yeah, I'll probably announce it there, but you'll have to go on the website and
sign up so you get invited.
You don't have to buy the book, but you got to go up and sign on the website.
That's cool. One of the coolest things about being stuck at home, even though I still have to work full time, is just being able to utilize all these technological resources to talk to all these people and meet all these people and learn all this stuff from people all over the world. It's making me super excited to travel when we finally get to, and actually meet all of these really cool people that want to give their knowledge away, right?
Yeah.
Like you. I mean,
I'll be your traveling companion.
You, for the last couple decades, have spent most of your Penzic giving your knowledge away.
Yeah, and just figure, you see how passionate I am about this, and I've got the qualifications in both fields, and I've been working on this same system for 50 years, improving it, trimming, making other things that are better. Like I threw away my initial way I did the rap. For the first 20 years of the site, I did it one way. I now teach it a different way because it's so much better.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing too, is that I was just talking to my knight the other day about this, and fighting is like ogres or onions. Fighting's like an onion, right? You keep exposing layers, and there's more and more to learn, and then you go back and you're like, the layer that you thought you had learned, you actually can reincorporate. It's like finding $5 in your pocket, right?
Oh, it's amazing. Like these little times where my squires come over and ask me. One time they had one where Venadius was using his glaive, and they've got a drill where Todd's the smaller, the 6'4" one, the tattoo artist. He's fighting with a shield, and what he has to do is get his shield on and control the glaive with it. And Venadius has to get the spear off to get around, and Todd has to change to a sword and then get back to his shield. It goes back and forth. They call it the exhaustion drill, and boy, they sweat like crazy at it. So they come up with me, and Venadius has got a shield, Todd has a shield. Venadius has his point right near the edge, and he's pushing really hard. And then he'll release it and come right around in sort of a disengage. And Todd says, I can't do anything about that. He just gets me. So what do you do? I said, I don't know. Let me see. And so we got that point, and he had the thing. And when he did the disengage, I went like this. I just let his force just turn me around sideways. I didn't know I was going to do that. But that's, when I look at it after doing that, that's the way the system tells me to do it. Yeah. So those little times are fun. Hell, just 2 weeks ago, I'm teaching somebody back in North Carolina, and I've taught the single hip. And I've also taught them the snap with the molinet instead of hitting. And then I said to myself, you could do that with a single hip too. You just get a molinet that goes in the opposite direction. Sure enough, you can do it. I hadn't thought of it before.
Yeah, it's cool. All right, we're gonna head into the final 10 because I've taken you way over time. All right, if you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
I actually won't let either of my sons.
Good answer. Who would you like to see reign in your kingdom? This could be the West or on tier, either one.
Oh, probably Rifkin.
Yeah.
Working on it. If you could talk stick with anyone in the world for an hour, who would it be?
Oh, that's a hard one. God, there's so many people. There's too many to tell. Can I just name a few?
Yeah.
Sir Steinar, or Count Steinar now. He was fun.
He's such a student of the sword.
Yeah, it's Sagan, either my sons, my grandson, Wilhelm. Damn, I'm sorry, but the name is going. It's one of the Ontarian dukes. God, I'm getting old. Sorry.
What does he look like?
He's tall and thin, about 6'2".
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, but he's one of the few people that have actually come up to me and said, "I want to talk stick with you."
Tiernan,
not Tiernan. It's
Yarton.
He is also quite the student.
And of course, Thorin. I mean,
yeah.
Thorin is actually one of my probably the most highly accomplished of my students. But he started back in the 70s.
Yeah, he had a very large role in getting me knighted. He was such a good teacher for me.
Well, that's cool. It was sort of funny that if you don't mind me telling a little story.
Go for it.
Right after I came up here, they were having an Ithra just south of me in Mount Vernon, and Thorin was teaching, and I said, "Do you mind if I come and sit in the class?" "Oh, sure. Make comments every time you like." And he gets to the end of the class, and he's just doing question and answer. And one of the questions are, "You and His Grace do really nasty styles. They're just devastating, but they're different. How can you characterize it different?" And he says, "Well, I'm tricky. I'm going to hit you where you don't expect. His Grace is scary because he's going to hit you wherever he pleases." It's not quite true, but it was funny.
Yeah. All right. What is your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
I think it was that one where he's defending an old Norman round tower, and he does Joie de Seigneur on one of the village girls, and then keeps her, and they have an uprising. The Warlord.
Okay. It's not Fistful of Yen?
Well, it's not hardly commercial.
That was a joke.
If we go into Japanese, the Japanese Chushingura is my favorite, 47 Ronin, not the new one, the old one.
If you could add a rule to the rules of the lists, what would it be?
You have to wear armor.
You don't like the sport Viking up here?
I do not. And it's a bad example for the young fighters. They say, well, if Duke so-and-so does it, I can do it. And that's not true.
No, it's not. Before you know how to block and before you damage all your nerves, you need armor.
And you know that there's ways of dealing with, size and relative strength and weight. You can make it fair. You don't have to do a full plate all the time.
Okay. What is your favorite tournament format?
I like round robins. Basically, I run them the same way I run my tournaments, but you have to fight everybody else eventually. Actually, if it's not Sport of Kings, La Providura that they used to have in the West, where they'd have fields of like 20 and something like that. I actually made the list of matches for anywhere up to 25 contestants on a field. Really hard to do.
I actually got to fight you at La Providura. We were on the same field. That was a highlight. Let's see. What is your favorite event?
Favorite event? Actually, La Providura was probably close to it. Yeah.
Cool.
Actually, my favorite event was it doesn't happen anymore, but it was a tournament held at the end of February in California, where the weather's sort of nice then. And basically, it was the first tournament of the year because there weren't that many events. And it was simple, single elimination. And the winner got a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and a laurel wreath for his lady. I say his because in those days, women weren't allowed to fight, which is unfortunate. But it was just so cool because basically it was simply crown without the crown happening. It was really cool.
That's cool. If you could have any helmet regardless of cost, what kind would it be?
These days, either Anselm or Acer.
What kind though? Like a version A?
Actually, the
Fascinating?
kind I like is the ones that has the faceplates that come in and have a thing there. Duke Guy of Castle Kirk made the first one of those I have, and there's an Eighton Belton fighter who's Dennis the Titan's cousin who made the second one, the one I have now.
It's a barbute, right?
No, it's not a barbute. I don't really know. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
Has a little ridge down the top and comes down on the sides and has the faceplates come in.
Okay. It's Saturday morning at Estrella, and several people want to talk to you about last night. What did you do?
Probably stayed around my camp and talked to people all evening.
Who is your favorite fight ever, or what fight?
The one that comes up, it was just Big Stephen of Beckenham and I, and it was just the two of us. It was just a pickup fight with us. And that's the one that it was a dance. It was just a dance, and I was fighting, I think, two sword and maybe great sword, new sword and shield. And there was stuff that both of us were blocking that just was insane that we could block them. And it just kept flowing and flowing and flowing and flowing.
Yeah, I get to talk to him on Sunday with Mari is going to guest host with me because they're tight and they go back. And I'm really excited about it because anytime I talk to someone from the West, they always mention him as an influence. Always.
Absolutely. He is probably somebody that learned my style as good as anybody ever has. And then put his own little touch on it, which is the style, not the system. But all his basic techniques are the system. But man, he's fun to fight. He's the only one I ever threw a cheat fake against, too.
Who is the cleanest fighter you've ever seen?
Cleanest?
Yeah.
Oh, there are a lot of Brian, probably.
Yeah, he's a pretty clean fighter. Okay, so I have to say one more thing to you, and then we will call it a night. I'm supposed to say Bellatrix do no arigato gozaimasu.
That's thank you.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and telling us all the stories. That was super cool. And I look forward to your Bellatrix book club.
Well, thank you. And then thanks so much for doing this. You're doing a really wonderful thing, Rifkin, and I really appreciate you doing this for basically the art and everything. It's very good of you to do it. So thank you for having me.
Well,
And
you're very
thank you
welcome,
for
and it's been
attending.
super fun.
It's sort of funny. I look at the picture.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining
Okay.
us. I'll see you
Thanks
next
again.
time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.